It ain't the left side or the right side, then it must be the FinSide. It ain't the left side.
Thank you, Solo D. Welcome to another episode of On the FinSide here with Kat and Paul Pickin. Follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Spreaker, iTunes, YouTube, iHeartRadio, and on Spotify. Also, check out our merchandise store on thefinside.threadless.com. Be sure to check out, too, our interview with your boy Q. He has a show called Unnecessary Roughness on ESPN. Gave a great breakdown on the Raiders. We're going to continue that here with our points to the game. Paul, Dolphins are 2-0. Raiders are 0-2. It's obviously, at this point, you got to think early in the season, a must-win game for the Raiders. And it's a chance for the Dolphins to really pull ahead here in the AFC East this early in the season.
Yeah, you look at it this way, and Miami, if they win this week and then win against the Patriots next week, at the very worst, they could have a 2-game lead in the AFC East, potentially, at the very worst. So, I mean, that's huge, getting to the point where you're a quarter of the way through the NFL season. The Raiders, you know from when years ago John Gruden was rumored to come to Miami potentially, I'm not a fan at this point. I think he does some mystifying things, and I think he's bought a little too much into the John Gruden legend himself. I thought that when he was with Tampa, and I've really seen it thus far out in Oakland while he's renting a spot there, or LA, or Vegas, whichever location they decide to claim this week. But it's very much my biggest worry in this game is that this is going to be a trap game for the Dolphins. The Raiders aren't doing a lot well. Derek Carr looks decent so far, and Amari Cooper looks decent thus far, and that really plays into Miami's strengths, though. So it's going to be strength against strength. And then the Raiders have a lot of holes right now. They don't have much of a pass rush. I don't see this being a game where, unless it ends up being a trap game, Miami could lose.
The Dolphins are favored by 3 points right now. I was actually a little surprised to see that line. I did watch both Raiders games on NFL.com. Just a couple of observations. Number one, in this pass game, Derek Carr threw a lot of short passes, a lot of checkdowns. He was actually 21 for 22 against the Broncos at one point. But when the Broncos started tightening up on defense, a lot of that went away, and he really flopped there in the fourth quarter. They've struggled a little bit to get the running game going with Marshawn Lynch. He's a powerful back, but those holes that have been there for Raiders running backs behind this offensive line featuring Rodney Hudson and Osemele and Gabe Jackson, Colton Miller, Donald Penn, they haven't been there that much. So there's a lot of imbalance there for the Raiders on offense. And so overall right now, Derek Carr, 80.6% completion rate, 590 yards, 2 games, 1 touchdown, 3 interceptions. So a lot of imbalance there on the offensive side of the ball. Jared Cook, their tight end, 9th overall in receiving yards this year. He's gotten off to a monster start this year. And Jared Cook had 8 catches for over 120 yards against the Dolphins last year. But I also think the Dolphins are going to be able to cover tight ends a lot better this year, too.
Completely. I mean, I fully expect they'll be shadowing him with Minka, Rashad, if he's healthy. They've got Jerome Baker, who's a little bit quicker at linebacker now. And really, outside of Jared Cook and Amari Cooper, nobody's done anything for the Raiders. Jordy Nelson looks like a bust, looks like somebody that, Aaron Rodgers just made look good. Jalen Richards, the number 3 overall receiver behind Cook and Cooper for these guys, and he's got 50 yards receiving with a 6.1 yard per catch average. So, I mean, they're not doing anything special in the passing game. They barely have over 160 yards rushing as a team. And Miami's defense has looked so good thus far. I just don't see them breaking that cycle this week.
2 things that really stick out for me here that the Dolphins need to do is, obviously, every defense needs a good pass rush every game, but it's more important in this one. I mean, I've said in the last 2 games, it's not as important you get a great pass rush against Marcus Mariota or Sam Darnold because they can avoid that pass rush so well, and they're actually better throwing on the run. Derek Carr is not that type of quarterback. He will take a snap, he'll drop back, he'll survey the field, that ball's got to be out in a few seconds. And if it's not, sometimes he struggles to know where to put it. You saw that last game against Denver when the pass rush started, he struggled big time. And if Robert Quinn and Cameron Wake at the defensive end spot can force that pressure and they can get some of that pressure up the middle, it's going to make it a long day for Derek Carr. The other side of that is we saw it last year on Monday Night Football where Derek Carr had a phenomenal game. The Dolphins didn't get a pass rush against them.
No, and this is true. And while we're talking about pass rush as well, I mean, the Raiders side of the ball on defense, their pass rush, they've got 2 sacks to this point. 2 sacks in 2 games. I mean, you have a rough game, one game, fine, but that's 2 rough games right there as far as your pass rush goes. And their leading tackler on defense has as many tackles as Kiko had in one game. I mean, it was a good game, but to be that low 2 games in and be the leading tackler on the team, that there's so much I dislike about this Raiders team right now.
Yeah, and in terms of run defense, even though there's a lot of promise with the rookies, against opposing running backs this year in 2 games, 5.76 yards a carry. And this is a game I think Kenyon Drake is really due to break out and have over 100 yards rushing in this. So it's going to be hot in Miami, and if they can balance that running game, I think that they're going to keep the Raiders on their toes a lot. And if you want to look at how winded the Raiders can get defensively, look at Bruce Irvin and Arden Key on the last 2 drives of the Raiders-Broncos game on NFL.com if you can, because they were winded and there was no pass rush. That's why Case Keenum put together 2 back-to-back drives to end up winning that game. So you've got Kenyon Drake on that. Another part, too, is I talked about Rashaan Melvin in our other broadcast. Former Dolphin. He was on the Dolphins practice squad 2014, and in 2016 he almost made the team. Went on to the Colts and the Raiders, and now he's the top cornerback for the Raiders. Has turned into a good player. I think the Dolphins need to avoid him at all costs. So you've got Rashaan Melvin, and then you've got Gary and Conley on the other side. Pretty good players, pretty up and coming players too. The ones you got to pick on in this one are Leon Hall, the third cornerback, who's 58, and the safeties, Carl Joseph and Eric Harris, and there's another guy that I'm not quite remembering off the top of my head, but not a lot of speed there. So I think if you avoid Gary and Conley and Rashaan Melvin and you spread the field out and you use that speeder receiver, I think the Dolphins are going to have success through the air too.
They really could. I mean, this is not a Raiders team that looks like they can force turnovers. They've got 1 apiece on fumbles and interceptions at this point. They're not going to pressure Tannehill, so he should have time. And really, it's kind of comical as you were talking. All I could think about was, you've got Arden Key on the front. You've got Bruce Irvin at the second level. And then at the third level, you've got Gary and Conley. And not a whole lot else other than Rashaan Melvin, obviously. So you've got 1-1-2 as far as special players. There's 11 guys out there, and they're throwing out a defense that would be good if you were playing NFL blitz and only had, 1-1-2, but you can't do that in the NFL. You're not going 4-on-4. You're going 11-on-11, and they haven't even seen a back like Kenyon Drake yet or Frank Gore. And the 2-headed monster in Miami's backfield, as well as what Tannehill can do with his legs, as we saw last week. I just don't see a scenario in this game other than if Miami lets themselves get lulled into complacency, which we've seen them do in the past, that Miami doesn't rack up some stats in this game.
Right. The matchups definitely are there for the Dolphins. Bruce Irvin moved down to defensive end this year, so he is the one guy who can fly off the edge and cause some problems. But other than that, there's not a guy that really moves the needle on the Raiders roster. Defensively, they didn't play terrible last week, but then again, the Broncos aren't very good on offense either. So, Paul, how do you see this game going? What's your prediction in this contest?
I think you've already got a feel for how I see this game going. I don't see it being even close. They've got, I think, 3 touchdowns on offense, and they've only been in position to kick, I think, 3 or 4 field goals at this point. This is not a Raiders team that can put up a lot of points, and Gase has started to show that he's not afraid to keep on the gas finally this year because he's calling fun plays that he wants to get into. I see this, unless Miami lets themselves get lulled to sleep, I see this being probably like a 30-10 game, and that's with the Raiders getting a garbage time touchdown.
The only way I can see the Raiders winning this is if they protect Derek Carr very well. If they do that, I think they've got just as good of a chance to beat the Dolphins as the Dolphins do to beat the Raiders. But I don't see that happening either. The Dolphins' defensive line has been on fire, and I think they're going to keep rotating those defensive linemen in the Miami Heat, and I think they're going to get a lot of pass rush in the second half. I also see the Dolphins winning this convincingly. I'm going to go with 31-17 Dolphins. So, not to count our chickens before they hatch, but if the Dolphins go 3-0, next week against New England, this is going to be the biggest game for the Dolphins in a decade, maybe even more, and I don't think that's an over-exaggeration. And say that they beat the Raiders, they go to 3-0, and then they beat the Patriots to go to 4-0. Getting ahead of myself, the rest of the season, you still have the Bills twice, the Jets, the Giants, the Redskins, the Texans, and the Colts. So you could be 3-0, and if you beat the Patriots, you're 4-0, and now you've got 7 games that you should win the rest of the way. It would be a magical start to the beginning of the season for the Dolphins here.
Completely, and really, I'm with you there. It's hard not to get lulled into that trap game ourselves here. I know one thing that we'll be talking about a lot next week, but I just want to get your thoughts here. I know as soon as word broke that the Browns were looking to trade Josh Gordon, I know I was in a bar full of Dolphin fans Saturday night, and pretty much everyone I talked to was like, Jesus, he's going to go to the Patriots for absolutely nothing. And then, sure enough, word broke. He went to the Patriots for absolutely nothing. What are your thoughts there? Because I'm just disgusted.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely good for the Patriots. It can't be bad. I mean, 5th or 6th round, conditional 5th round pick. Yeah, but one thing to keep in mind, too, is Josh Gordon has played, 7 games in the last 3 years. I don't think he's quite the smashing superstar that he was several years ago when he played 14 games and had 1,500 yard receiving. But it can't be bad for the Patriots. They really simplify the route concepts for a player like this. So basically he's going to be running deep and hopefully attacking double coverages downfield to open things up in the middle. So yeah, I'm not pleased, and Josh Gordon is probably going to make his debut against the Dolphins next week.
Agreed. And I'll tell you, I'm really glad watching this Raiders team, just to get back to it, that Miami did not sign John Gruden a couple of years ago. I won't call him Chucky because we actually have a Dolphin super fan, Chucky Roche there, and I won't insult him by calling him that. So, yeah.
Trading Khalil Mack is one of the stupidest trades I've ever seen. I don't care what happens. I mean, you've got a guy there who was a top 5 pick. He comes into the league. He has 37 sacks over his last 3 years in the NFL. Does everything you want, and then you trade him. I don't care if you got 2 first-round picks for him. 2 mid-first-round picks are not going to equal what Khalil Mack could have done for the Raiders. So hopefully that lack of energy and that lack of pass rush continues against the Oakland Raiders for the Miami Dolphins, and the Dolphins get to 3-0. That will do it for our breakdown of the Dolphins-Raiders matchup. You can follow Paul and I on Facebook, Twitter, Spreaker, iTunes, YouTube, iHeartRadio, and on Spotify. Also, be sure to check out our merchandise store as well on the FinSide.threadless.com. And if it's not on the right side and it's not on the left side, it is on the FinSide. Solo D, take us home.
It ain't the left side or the right side, and it must be the FinSide. It ain't the left side or the right side, and it must be the FinSide. Listen, Dolphins fans across the land all tuning in to see what